privilege and honor to benefit from another keynote speech by one of the other great African scholars, African thinker, Professor Lumumba. Professor Patrick Locke Ochena Lumumba is a former dean of the Kabarak University School of Law and currently is an advocate of the High Courts of Kenya and Tanganyika. He earned his LLB and LLM from the University of Nairobi in Kenya and his LLD from the University of Ghent in Belgium. It's really our privilege and honor, Professor, to have you with us to tell us about African values and justice. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking the Minister and the Ministry of Justice of the State of Eritrea for inviting me here and through the midwifery of my good friend, Professor Abdul-Wahib. So thank you very much. I'm glad to be with you. I've had the opportunity of listening to the presentations yesterday and this morning. I therefore will benefit from them in terms of my presentation, because this is not a purely academic engagement. It is an attempt to discuss matters that are practical. And it is my pleasure, therefore, to share my thoughts with you. And of course, typically I've written a paper, but what I'm going to say will depart in many ways from the paper that I had written. Let me start by prefacing my intervention by asking the young people here, how many of you have watched Roots by Alex Haley? The young ones. And you know, when you are young, you know. How many of you here have watched Africa, a Triple Heritage by Professor Ali Mazrui? Africa is never allowed, and I use this deliberately, and I'm very happy, Madam Minister, that there is not an NGO from the Western world which has sponsored this particular gathering. I go to many gatherings, Danida, GIZ. Once you have those people as sponsoring your things, there is a hidden agenda. It is painful, it's shoestring, and when they do, sometimes they do, there are some of them who are friends of goodwill, but to the extent that is humanly possible, you must underwrite your own costs, because then you determine your agenda. Which brings me to another thing, values, and are they taught? Professor Macharia Munene posed the question to the good Professor Mohammed here, are they taught? There was an attempt at answering that question from the back, an attempt. Are they taught in an orderly, systematized manner so that they can become a body of language, a body of laws? I'm saying that one of the things that we must deal with in most of Africa is to revamp our curricula. You know, you go to most African institutions of learning, and they are taught in the very same way that the colonialists taught. But what was the purpose of the colonialist system of education? To create a human being who would be equipped with knowledge to serve the colonial state. The neo-colonial state continues with that training to the detriment of the continent of Africa. We must revamp our curriculum and begin to ask, what is it that we are teaching and how are we teaching it? Today, you go to many African universities and you ask them, are you teaching, if it is schools of law, do you have a curriculum that targets the teaching of human rights based on the African Charter and Human and People's Rights? You go to SADC, You ask the students in the southern region whether their institutions of learning are talking about treaties. You do the same in ECOWAS. You do the same in the Maghreb, in Central Africa, and in East Africa, and they do not. We are still teaching things that were taught and are being taught in Europe and America. And then we think we can compete. Then we think we can have values. And there are people who have done that, borrowing. And I remember that we should not isolate. We cannot afford the luxury of isolation. We must learn from other regions. You know, I will conclude shortly, because I must. In 1982, I watched a movie. The younger people here, have you watched a movie, Gandhi? Yes. If you watch the movie Gandhi, when Mahatma Gandhi comes from India at the invitation of Professor Gokhale, he is invited at a meeting in New Delhi, where there are businessmen and scholars, and he did not intend to speak. But he introduces himself and ultimately travels throughout India, and he addresses his first meeting, and this is what he said. When you are assembled here as lawyers and merchants pretending to be speaking for India, you do not speak for India. India is out there in the villages and in the hamlets. Their values, their justice system are not about the things we do in daily. I am asking us who are assembled here, let us not be in danger of being accused that we do not know the Africa that we are talking about. When we go to Africa, many of us, we have come here, we'll be in Asmara in a 5-star hotel. The next meeting we'll hold in Addis Ababa in a 5-star hotel. The next one in Khartoum in a 5-star hotel. Then the next one in Abuja in a 5-star hotel. We are talking to ourselves. We do not know Africa. We must know and understand Africa. Otherwise, what we do is to lengthen our curricula vitae by telling ourselves which meeting we attended and which one we are attending. Let us not be in danger of being in that space. So today, we are talking about African justice, African values, with the intention that the people of Eritrea, post-revolution, as they are rethinking how to reorder their society, may benefit from it. This is, in my understanding, what we are gathered here to achieve. And I'm suggesting the following. Number one, that we must re-examine our governance systems and study those governance systems and borrow from governance systems within Africa. I've already suggested to you that there is a beautiful book written about governance and culture, The Ghanaian Paradigm by Nana Kobina Nketiah, in which he suggests that in African governance system, there are things that we can borrow. I am suggesting that that be done. I am suggesting that we also look at our justice systems in different ways. And I'm suggesting that something has been done in the Rwandese system with Gacaca. And I'm suggesting that there is something within the Gacaca which can be found amongst the Akan in Ghana, can be found even amongst the Somalis in the Horn of Africa, can be found even amongst you, the Eritreans, can be found amongst different communities. And let us ask ourselves, as we are writing our penal codes, are there things that we can borrow from there? I'm asking you to look at those governance systems. I'm also asking you, when you are doing your constitution, you must not be imprisoned in the traditional method of constitution writing. Let us be creative and innovative and understand the Constitution as the repository of a people's present, past, and the future. As they say in Chichewa in Malawi, more important than this generation is our children's children. In other words, we must look to the future generation without governing them from the grave. Must be sufficiently elastic to allow them to interpret it in a proper manner. Number 4, I'm saying that there is wisdom in looking at the experiences of other peoples in the world. We must not be naive to assume that the things that we borrowed even from colonizers, all of them are bad. We have a saying in Kiswahili, baniani mbaya kiatu chake dawa. That even, and I'm transliterating, that even the shoes of a bad man can be a source of cure. So even those whom you do not think are likely to benefit you, there are things that you can borrow from them because a lot of thought has gone into those international instruments, even as I said what I was saying. So let us not be dismissive. The experiences we have had here from Nicaragua are useful. The experiences from Italy are useful. The experiences from colonizers are also useful. To the extent that you are able to adopt and adapt. This is the most critical thing. Nothing fits lock, stock, and barrel. Adopt and adapt and customize. Once you do that, you are in good space. Ultimately, this is what I want to conclude with. Even honest statements must be unpacked. And this is the statement that I want to demonstrate why they must be unpacked and domesticated. American Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia. We hold this truth to be self-evident, that all men are born equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When that statement was made, were women equal? Were blacks equal? No. In other words, we must, in the nature of things, when we are making declarations, think of the future. Because we are not only thinking about today, we must create elastic justice systems which are capable of being adopted and adapted by future generations in a manner that fits their circumstances without changing the DNA of what they seek to achieve. I hold the view that Africa continent has a lot to share, but we don't share sufficiently. I hold the view that we are victims of our own lethargy and victims of our own ignorance, and the time is now that we must begin to think differently. And that is why when I hear things such as Africa Agenda 2063, they make beautiful promises. Africa is actually a forest of beautiful treaties and declarations, which are honored in breach. It is our duty to give them practical meaning. When we talk about Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we must ask ourselves, what are the values that we are going to infuse? You talked about fairness. I want you to look at the book, the notebook that you are writing on. It is from Indonesia. The one that you are writing on is from Indonesia. It's made in Indonesia. If we are not careful, if we don't have values, even on matters such as trade, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area will be a conduit for goods from other places. What is an African good? We must also determine that. What is the technological input? What is the intellectual input that must go into a thing before it is called African? Easier said than done, but once again, as I conclude, I know societies that have done so. The Koreans have done so to the extent that is possible. The Japanese did so. China, before our very eyes, are doing so. The Turks are doing so. We are a market and a population of 1.4 billion and still counting, and the youngest continent on earth. Our values and our justice systems must be given their pride of place so that we are able to compete. Many times we are not able to compete because we do not have the capacity to articulate. The media, we must have our own media, our own values about how we package news. I was in my room trying to open the television, it refused. But if it had accepted the promise that I'm given in the package is that I'll be watching BBC and CNN. Not an African media. Our values must also relate to the news that we are dealing with. Ladies and gentlemen, one can go on and on until the cows come home. But I'm speaking to men and women who are enlightened, and what I've done is simply to provoke a few ideas with the hope that when you are doing this, and we wish you well, all the people here are your well-wishers. We do not have monopoly of knowledge or wisdom, but today, in my view, we have provided you with a buffet of ideas, a smorgasbord of ideas. Pick and choose those which are relevant and reject those which are useless. Ultimately, it is Eritreanness and Africanness that will make us proud. Malcolm X once said, until the African in the continent is respected, the African anywhere in the world will never be respected. He will be present at a dinner table, but never as a diner. He'll always be a waiter or food to be consumed. Let us change that narrative. Thank you.